Long ago, in Russia, where icy fields and simple villages were the daily routine, there was born a man who would change the fate of a nation. This man, Grigory Rasputin, was neither a noble nor a refined man, but a peasant with dirty skin, a sloppy appearance, and habits that defied every social norm. In fact, he was as unlikely as anyone could imagine to become an influential figure in one of the most aristocratic and imposing courts in the world. But how exactly did he stand out? What made a man filthy and smelling like a mix of goat and rotten fish cross palace halls and sit next to Russia's most powerful people? Rasputin didn't need a beautiful face, elegant clothes, or a noble degree. He possessed something much more intriguing, and in a way, much more dangerous: unwavering confidence, personal magnetism, and a behavior so unique that no one could ignore him. Rasputin began his journey not in altars or temples, but in the dirty, dusty streets of Siberia, where he cultivated his belief that dirt was a form of purification. He believed that cleansing the body was a sin, that dirt was divine, and the dirtier you were, the closer to God you became. He never bathed, and his followers called him holy filth, an irony that would become his trademark. Unlike the nobles of Moscow and St. Petersburg, who spent hours bathing and gazing into mirrors, Rasputin wore his smell, his filth, as a badge of honor, and this disregard for personal care wasn't a sign of weakness, but rather a statement of power. As Rasputin traveled across Russia, he cultivated a cult of personality, where his image as a rugged, filthy man was seen as something almost mystical. He didn't just refuse to clean his body, he made it a psychological weapon. It was a way to become unforgettable, a figure who entered the luxurious salons of aristocratic homes and, instead of being rejected, attracted gazes, even from those who would never dare approach such a dirty man. He had no degree, no pedigree, but he had something stronger than social conventions: the ability to capture everyone's attention. Rasputin's rise didn't begin with power or fortune, but with a gaze and an idea. That piercing gaze, combined with blind faith, was what would make him one of the most controversial figures in history. And in a country where social tensions were boiling over, he knew exactly how to use his image and behaviors to become unforgettable. Rasputin wasn't just a dirty man, he made dirt a life philosophy. At a time when bathing was seen as synonymous with purity and holiness, he defied all conventions by teaching that true holiness lay in embracing dirt and impurity. To him, the act of washing the body was an arrogant attempt to alter what God had already created perfectly. He believed that the dirtier someone was, the closer to God they became. He didn't see dirt as a flaw, but as a divine virtue. The idea of holy filth quickly spread among his followers. They saw Rasputin as a man touched by higher wisdom, someone who had transcended the worldly concepts of cleanliness and hygiene. To them, dirt was not something to be feared, but something to be revered. Rasputin used this philosophy as a tool to distinguish himself from other religious leaders and figures of his time. He knew that by doing something as shocking as refusing to bathe, he would be creating an indelible mark, an image that no one could ignore. While others strived to maintain appearances and please society, Rasputin stood firm in his belief that true purity lay in dirt. His body, covered in mud, hair, and filth, became his greatest weapon. When entering the homes of the rich and powerful, he didn't need a good appearance or luxurious clothes. His smell, his dirt, became part of his identity and influence. And, contrary to what one might expect, this didn't push people away, it brought them closer. Rasputin became an object of worship precisely because his rejection of the conventional, his refusal to follow society's standards, made him much more attractive to those who felt the world around them was empty and false. He represented an alternative to the sophisticated but superficial society of Imperial Russia. This idea that dirt could be a virtue was the first step in his journey to gaining power. He was not only accepted but at some point became revered. Rasputin's true strength didn't come only from his repulsive appearance, but from a power that went beyond physical looks. His eyes. Many witnesses described his eyes as mesmerizing, piercing, almost supernatural. He didn't need words or grand gestures to grab attention. His eyes, deep and intense, were capable of capturing the soul of anyone in front of him. That unwavering, unblinking gaze made anyone feel as though they were being watched down to their deepest secrets. In a society where etiquette was more rigid than armor, and where glances between men and women were typically formal or even avoided, Rasputin broke all these barriers. When he looked at someone, it wasn't just a glance. It was as if he was stripping the person of their layers, observing their purest essence. This type of intense attention, so rare and so uncomfortable, created an immediate connection, as if he were the only one capable of seeing what no one else could. His ability to stare deeply into people became one of his greatest tools of manipulation. Women, in particular, found themselves drawn to this form of attention, an attention that transcended the conventional limits of a gaze. Rasputin didn't just look, he hypnotized. This power of captivating anyone's attention with the simple act of locking eyes was one of the keys to his control over the Russian aristocracy. But he didn't just use his eyes. He knew when and how to use the right words, and with his hypnotic gaze, he created an aura of mystery and respect that made him even more irresistible. Rasputin could look at a woman and, with a simple gesture, make her feel special, desired and understood like never before. This psychological control was what allowed him to penetrate the Russian imperial court and become an integral part of the life of Empress Alexandra. Rasputin wasn't just a dirty man. He presented himself as a divine emissary, a spiritual advisor with a mystical power that drew in women from the Russian high society. He didn't merely manipulate their emotions and desires, but did so disguised as divine kindness and spiritual power. Rasputin knew exactly how to exploit the yearning for forgiveness, the longing for redemption, and the search for something deeper that the women of the Russian aristocracy felt, even if they didn't know what it was. In a society where rigid morality and wifely duties were imposed on noble women, Rasputin presented himself as a spiritual savior, someone who could ease their anxieties and impurities. He told them that to truly connect with God, they had to abandon the shackles of traditional morality, for true transcendence could only be reached when they left behind the limitations imposed by society. The way he manipulated their desire for liberation was subtle but powerful. He didn't need to promise wealth or power. He offered something much more valuable, the feeling of being unique, of being chosen by something greater. Rasputin used his ability to make sin divine, convincing women that their desires weren't mistakes but paths to encountering God. He became the figure who validated their forbidden wishes, offering a safe space where their actions were interpreted as acts of faith. For many of these women, being part of Rasputin's circle, whether through spiritual advice or more personal methods, was a privilege, an opportunity to transcend the limitations of society. Thus, Rasputin positioned himself as a sacred figure who not only had the ability to heal but also to liberate. His power over these women didn't come just from his ability to seduce them physically, but from his ability to touch them spiritually. He made them believe they were performing an act of faith when, in reality, they were being manipulated by their own need for validation and freedom. Rasputin used his position to transform every interaction into an experience that seemed divine, but in truth, was a flawless psychological manipulation. Rasputin knew exactly how to exploit the weaknesses of the Russian imperial family, and Empress Alexandra, wife of Tsar Nicholas II, was his greatest vulnerability. She, a devout woman deeply concerned with the health of her son Tsarevich Alexei, who suffered from hemophilia, found in Rasputin the answer to her prayers. Hemophilia was an incurable condition, and any injury, no matter how small, could be fatal for the young heir. For years, the court doctors had failed to help Alexei, and when Rasputin appeared, promising healing through prayer and divine intervention, the desperate Alexandra clung to him like a lifeline. Rasputin claimed that his connection to God and his ability to pray were the key to healing the Tsarevich, and what happened next seemed like a miracle. Every time Alexei suffered a hemorrhagic crisis, Rasputin would appear, pray, and somehow, the boy seemed to recover quickly. Of course, the recovery could have been a coincidence, or perhaps a psychological effect generated by Alexandra's hope, but to her, that didn't matter. What she saw was a man with extraordinary powers, someone who had the ability to save her son. And with that, she completely surrendered to Rasputin, trusting him not only with Alexei's health, but with her own judgment. This blind trust gave Rasputin an unprecedented power over the imperial family. Alexandra made no important decisions without first consulting Rasputin. He became a constant presence at the palace, and his influence grew as he offered advice, not only on spiritual matters but also on political and administrative issues that affected the future of Russia. The figure of the holy filthy man, which at first might have seemed absurd, was now at the center of one of the most powerful families in the world, controlling, in the shadows, the most crucial decisions of the empire. But Rasputin was not just a healer for the empress, he became her confidant, her friend, and her advisor. His closeness to the empress was not just a matter of faith but also manipulation. He exploited her emotional vulnerabilities, feeding her insecurities and making her believe that he was the only one capable of protecting her family. Rasputin understood that by winning Alexandra's trust, he would not only have power over her but also over the entire imperial court. At the height of his power, Rasputin believed he was immortal, protected by a divine force that made him untouchable, even by those who wanted him out of the picture. But like every rise, Rasputin's came to its climax, and the fall was near. With his influence over the Russian imperial family growing, he began to make powerful enemies. The elite of the Russian court could no longer tolerate Rasputin's increasing interference in the empire's affairs. His advice was often disastrous, and his presence became more and more unwelcome. Many saw Rasputin as a direct threat to the stability of the empire and the monarchy itself. It was clear that his power was challenging the control of the nobility and weakening Tsar Nicholas II's position. The tipping point came with Rasputin's insistence on influencing political and military decisions, such as his opposition to Russia's involvement in World War I, which worsened the empire's situation. For many, Rasputin had become the symbol of the decadence and corruption that plagued Imperial Russia. The nobility began to plot against him. In December 1916, a group of aristocrats, led by Prince Felix Yusupov, decided that Rasputin had to die. What followed was one of the most bizarre deaths in history. The conspirators poisoned him with cyanide, offering him cakes and wine laced with poison. But to their astonishment, Rasputin didn't die. He continued to eat and drink, defying death in a way that seemed supernatural. After several hours, Yusupov, frustrated, shot him, and Rasputin apparently fell dead. But the story didn't end there. When the conspirators tried to take the body to the river to dispose of it, Rasputin, with a final gasp, stood up and tried to escape. He still managed to run, even after being poisoned and shot, and only collapsed after being shot again. But the greatest surprise of all came from the autopsy. Rasputin had water in his lungs, indicating that he was still alive when thrown into the river. The death of the man considered immortal seemed to be a prophetic event, as if he was truly protected by something beyond human understanding. Before his death, Rasputin had written a farewell letter in which he predicted the fall of the empire. In his words, if he were assassinated by the nobles, the Romanov dynasty would fall within 2 years. What seemed like the delirium of a desperate man quickly turned into a fulfilled prophecy. Just months after his death, the Russian Revolution erupted, forcing Tsar Nicholas II to abdicate and leading to the execution of the entire royal family. Rasputin, even after his death, had caused the disintegration of what seemed like an eternal dynasty. Rasputin's prophecy was not only about the fall of the empire, but also about the violent deaths of the Romanov family, which he had predicted with chilling accuracy. While some historians argue that the empire was doomed regardless of Rasputin's influence, others believe that his presence at court and his scandals directly contributed to the monarchy's downfall. The fate of Rasputin, the man who believed he was immortal, had been sealed not only by the violence of his death but by the impact he had on Russia's history, becoming a symbol of the power of manipulation and the chaos that can arise when one challenges the laws of power and morality.